A full-price first-class ticket means you get your seat, right? Not if you're a 16-year-old black girl. Watch as twin sisters Amara and Ayana settle into their luxurious pods on a flagship international flight, only to be targeted by a wealthy passenger and a hostile flight attendant who refuse to believe they belong. The argument explodes, security is called, and one of the teens is physically dragged from her seat in front of a cabin of silent onlookers. But the silence shatters when a man walks in, a man no one was expecting, the man who owns the airline. The low melodic hum of the Boeing 777, 9's engines was a familiar lullaby to 16-year-old twins Amara and Ayana Sterling. For them, the hushed, exclusive atmosphere of the first-class cabin on a Sandair was less a novelty and more a second home. Their father's position afforded them a life of casual luxury that they had learned to navigate with a quiet, unassuming grace. Today was no different. They were flying from New York's JFK to London Heathrow, a routine trip to visit their grandparents for the summer. Ayana, ever the more pragmatic of the two, had already stowed her Ramawa carry-on in the overhead bin and was meticulously arranging her travel essentials in the spacious pod: a silk pillow, her noise-canceling headphones, and a well-worn copy of The Priory of the Orange Tree. Her movements were precise, efficient, a stark contrast to her sister. Amara, the dreamer, was still captivated by the view from the window. The tarmac was a ballet of ground crew and service vehicles, a miniature city bustling with purpose under the fading afternoon light. Her sketchbook lay open on her lap, a charcoal pencil dancing across the page as she captured the angular beauty of the winglet against the bruised purple and orange sky. Their seats 1A and 2A were the best on the plane, private suites with doors that slid shut, transforming the space into a personal sanctuary. The seats were upholstered in soft, cream-colored leather, and the air was scented with a subtle custom fragrance of white tea and fig. The twins, dressed in comfortable but stylish travel wear, matching heather gray cashmere tracksuits, looked perfectly at ease, their identical, intricate braided hairstyles cascading over their shoulders. They had boarded early, as was their custom, to settle in before the main rush. They exchanged a few words with the lead flight attendant, a polished woman in her late 40s named Cassandra, who greeted them with a practiced, if somewhat distant, smile. "Welcome aboard, ladies. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Some champagne, perhaps?" "Just orange juice for me, please," Ayana said without looking up from her book. "And a sparkling water with lime for me," Amara added, her eyes still fixed on the window. The drinks arrived promptly in heavy crystal glasses. The quiet rhythm of their pre-flight ritual was soothingly familiar. Other first-class passengers began to trickle in, a quiet assortment of business executives in sharp suits and wealthy couples in discreetly expensive leisure wear. Each new arrival was a soft rustle of clothing, a muted click of a briefcase latch, a polite murmur to the crew. The delicate peace was shattered by a woman who boarded with the auditory impact of a brass band. She was in her early 50s, dripping in gold jewelry that clanked with every step. Her face, a mask of expertly applied makeup, was pulled into a permanent state of dissatisfaction. She clutched a gaudy, logomanic purse and surveyed the cabin as if it were a slightly disappointing property she was considering buying. Her gaze swept past Amara and Ayana, then snapped back, a flicker of disbelief in her cold blue eyes. She flagged down Cassandra with an imperious wave of her hand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a sharp, nasal drawl. "I believe there's been a mistake." She gestured vaguely towards the twins with a perfectly manicured finger. "I was under the impression this was the first-class cabin." Cassandra's professional smile tightened. "You are correct, madam. This is first class." "Then what are they doing here?" the woman pressed, not bothering to lower her voice. A few nearby passengers glanced over, their curiosity piqued. Amara and Ayana exchanged a quick, weary look. It was a look they had perfected over years of similar encounters, a silent communication that conveyed a mixture of annoyance, resignation, and shared strength. Ayana carefully placed her bookmark in her novel and closed it, giving the woman her full attention. "We're sitting here because we have tickets," Ayana stated calmly, her voice even and clear. For seats 1A and 2A, the woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Davenport, let out a short, incredulous laugh. That's impossible. These are the premier seats. My husband and I always book these seats. There must be some sort of mix-up. Perhaps you're on the wrong flight, or maybe you misread your boarding passes. Economy is in the back. Amara, whose patience was always thinner than her sister's, felt a familiar heat rise in her chest. There's no mistake, she said, her tone sharper than Ayana's. We know exactly where we are. Cassandra, the flight attendant, stepped in, attempting to de-escalate, though her allegiance was subtly clear. Ma'am, let me see your boarding pass, and I can direct you to your assigned seat. And ladies, she said, turning to the twins, perhaps I could just verify your boarding passes as well, just to clear up any confusion. The request was coated in a syrupy layer of professionalism, but the implication was sharp and insulting. The idea that the two black teenagers were the source of the confusion, not the loud, presumptuous woman, was deeply offensive. Ayana, ever the diplomat, pulled their boarding passes from the side pocket of her seat. Here you go, she said, handing them to Cassandra. Cassandra glanced at them, her eyebrows raising almost imperceptibly as she confirmed the names and seat numbers. Yes, everything seems to be in order here. Sterling, seats 1A and 2A. She turned back to Mrs. Davenport. Their tickets are valid, madam. Your seat, 3B, is just across the aisle. Mrs. Davenport looked aghast. 3B? That's unacceptable. I'm a Platinum Medallion member. I have been flying with this airline for 20 years. I will not sit across the aisle while children sit in the best seats. There is clearly a system error. Her eyes narrowed, fixed on the twins. Or something else. The unspoken words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Something else. The implication that they couldn't possibly have acquired these tickets legitimately. Amara leaned forward, her voice low and firm. We're not moving. We're in our assigned seats. Mrs. Davenport scoffed, turning her full attention to Cassandra, as if the twins were no longer worth addressing directly. This is ridiculous. I demand you fix this. Move them. They can't possibly have paid the full fare for these suites. They are probably on some sort of upgraded employee pass or a discounted ticket. Full fare passengers take precedence. That's the rule. It was a blatant, ugly assumption, and it was the final straw. The casual cruelty, the baked-in prejudice of it all, made something snap within Amara. The calm facade she maintained for the sake of a peaceful journey crumbled into dust. Cassandra, the lead flight attendant, was now in an uncomfortable position. On one hand, she had two passengers with valid premier class tickets. On the other, she had a loud, belligerent, and clearly high-status passenger who was causing a scene. Her training dictated that she should defuse the situation, but her instincts, shaped by years of catering to the whims of the wealthy and powerful, told her to placate the squeaky wheel. And in her eyes, the squeaky wheel was Mrs. Davenport. She gave the twins a look that was meant to be placating but came across as condescending. Ladies, I understand you're in your assigned seats, but we do have a very distressed passenger here. To ensure an on-time departure and for the comfort of everyone in the cabin, would you perhaps consider moving to seats 4A and 4B? They are still lovely window seats. Ayana's calm demeanor finally cracked. You want us to move from the seats we paid for because this woman is distressed? She asked, her voice laced with disbelief. She's not distressed, she's prejudiced, and we are not moving. I am not prejudiced, Mrs. Davenport shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. I am simply a loyal customer who understands how things work. There is a pecking order on this airline, and I am at the top of it. You are not. It's that simple. The argument was drawing more attention now. A man in a business suit in 2D lowered his newspaper, his brow furrowed in concern. A younger couple across the aisle exchanged an uneasy glance. The cabin, once an oasis of tranquility, was now charged with a toxic tension. Cassandra's smile vanished, replaced by a stern, impatient mask. Ma'am, I'm not asking. I am insisting. We have a situation here. If you are unwilling to cooperate, I will have to involve the gate agent. We need to resolve this so we can close the cabin door. She was speaking to Ayana, but her threat was clearly aimed at both sisters. Amara, who had been simmering in a silent rage, finally spoke. "You're insisting," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're insisting that we give up our seats because this woman is throwing a tantrum. Are you hearing yourself? My husband is an extremely important lawyer," Mrs. Davenport added, as if this were a trump card. "He knows people at the highest levels of this company. This little incident will not go unnoticed, I assure you." This seemed to bolster Cassandra's resolve. She saw a clear path of least resistance, and it involved bulldozing the two teenage girls who, in her calculus, held no power. "That's it," she said, her voice crisp and final. "You are being disruptive and uncooperative. You are a threat to the safety and order of this flight." The accusation was so absurd it was almost laughable. Ayana and Amara, who had been reading and sketching, were now a threat. "This is insane," Ayana whispered, shaking her head. "We haven't done anything." "You have refused a direct instruction from a member of the flight crew," Cassandra said, her voice ringing with rehearsed authority. She pulled her communication device from her belt. "Gate agent, this is lead flight attendant Cassandra. I have a situation in the first-class cabin. 2 passengers in 1A and 2A are refusing to move from seats that were double booked and are being disruptive. I need security to come aboard and remove them." A collective gasp rippled through the few passengers who were now openly staring. "Double booked?" Amara cried out. "You just looked at our boarding passes. You know that's a lie." But Cassandra ignored her focus entirely on the impending arrival of authority. Mrs. Davenport, meanwhile, looked smug. She smoothed down her silk blouse and took a triumphant sip of the champagne that another flight attendant had discreetly placed at her elbow. She had won. A few minutes later, 2 burly airport security officers appeared at the cabin door. Their presence immediately changed the atmosphere from tense to intimidating. They were large men, their uniforms stark and official, their faces impassive. "Cassandra," one of them asked, his voice a low rumble. "Yes, right here," she said, pointing. "These 2. They need to be deplaned. They are refusing to follow instructions." The officers approached the sisters' pods. The man in 2D who had been watching now stood up. "Excuse me," he said to the officers. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. These girls haven't done anything wrong. This other passenger," he nodded towards Mrs. Davenport, "has been harassing them since she boarded." Cassandra shot him a venomous glare. "Sir, please return to your seat. This is a security matter." The man hesitated, then reluctantly sat back down, silenced by her authority. He had tried, but he was not willing to risk being removed from the flight himself. The first officer leaned down, his face close to Ayana's. "Ma'am, we need you and your sister to gather your belongings and come with us." Ayana stood her ground. "We're not going anywhere. We have tickets. We are confirmed passengers in these seats. Look up the manifest." The officer sighed, a sound of practiced weariness. "We don't look up manifests, ma'am. We follow the instructions of the flight crew. You can either walk off or we can escort you off. It's your choice." Tears of frustration and fury pricked at Amara's eyes. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. They had done everything right. They had followed the rules. And yet, here they were, being treated like criminals. She looked at her sister, whose face was a mask of defiant resolve. They weren't going to back down. "We're not walking," Amara said, her voice trembling but firm. "All right," the officer said, his voice flat. He reached into the pod. His large, firm hand closed around Amara's upper arm. "Let's go." Panic seized her. Real, physical panic. She flinched back, but his grip was like iron. "Get your hands off me," she yelled, her voice breaking. The second officer moved to block Ayana, who had stood up to intervene. The cabin was deathly silent, the only sound Amara's choked protests and the straining of fabric. The officer began to pull, physically dragging the 16-year-old girl from her luxurious first-class seat. Her sketchbook and pencils clattered to the floor. The half-finished drawing of the winglet was trampled under a heavy black boot. Mrs. Davenport watched with a thin, satisfied smile. Cassandra stood by the galley, her arms crossed, her expression one of grim justification. No one else said a word. The other passengers just watched, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a sort of guilty relief that it wasn't happening to them. As Amara was hauled, stumbling into the aisle, a figure appeared in the doorway of the jet bridge, silhouetted against the bright terminal lights. He was a tall, impeccably dressed black man in his late 40s. He paused for a moment, his sharp, intelligent eyes taking in the entire ugly scene in a single sweeping glance. The security officers, the triumphant glare of Mrs. Davenport, the stony face of his lead flight attendant, and the terrified, tear-streaked face of his daughter, Amara, being physically dragged from her seat. He took a slow, deliberate step into the cabin, and the world tilted on its axis. The man who stepped onto the aircraft was Robert Sterling. To the world, he was the revolutionary CEO of Ascendair, the man who had taken a legacy carrier and transformed it into the most profitable and prestigious airline in the world. He was known for his razor-sharp business acumen, his innovative approach to customer experience, and his notoriously low public profile. He preferred to let the excellence of his airline speak for itself. To Amara and Ayana, he was just Dad. He had been finishing a call in the private lounge when he got a frantic text from Ayana. "They're trying to kick us off the flight. Security is here." Robert's blood ran cold. He ended his call abruptly and strode through the terminal, his long-legged gait eating up the polished floor. He bypassed the gate agent's desk, flashing his executive credentials, a simple, elegant black card that granted him access to any part of any airport in the world where his airline operated. The agent, flustered by his sudden appearance, simply nodded him through. Now, standing at the threshold of the first-class cabin, the scene that greeted him was far worse than he could have imagined. It wasn't just a dispute. It was a physical assault on his child. His face, normally calm and composed, became an unreadable mask, but a dangerous energy emanated from him. It was the stillness of a predator, the coiled silence before a strike. His eyes, dark and piercing, missed nothing. He saw the security officer's hand gripping his daughter's arm. He saw the other officer blocking his other daughter. He saw the smug, victorious smirk on Mrs. Davenport's face. And he saw Cassandra, his lead flight attendant, standing by the galley, overseeing the entire sordid affair with an air of professional detachment. "Stop," Robert said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the cabin's strained silence with the authority of a thunderclap. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question, a voice that carried the weight of a billion-dollar enterprise on its every syllable. The security officer, startled, paused his manhandling of Amara. He looked up, his brow furrowed in annoyance at the interruption. "Sir, this is a restricted area. I'm going to have to ask you to step back onto the jet bridge." Robert Sterling ignored him. He took another deliberate step into the cabin, his gaze locking onto Cassandra. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition, but also confusion. She saw a powerful, well-dressed man, but she couldn't immediately place him. A VIP passenger who boarded late, perhaps? "What is going on here?" Robert asked, his voice still deceptively calm, yet laced with an icy fury that made the hairs on Cassandra's arms stand on end. "Sir," she began, slipping back into her professional script, "we have a security situation. These passengers were causing a disturbance and refused to follow crew instructions. They are being deplaned." She gestured towards the twins as if they were unruly luggage. "They were causing a disturbance," Robert repeated, his eyes moving from Cassandra to Amara, who was now sobbing quietly, a deep crimson mark forming on her arm where the officer had grabbed her. He looked at Ayana, standing protectively near her sister, her young face a mixture of defiance and fear. "My daughters?" The word hung in the air, electric. My daughters. Cassandra's professional facade began to crumble. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She stared at the man's face, really looked at him this time, not as an interruption but as a figure of authority. The chiseled jaw, the intense, intelligent eyes. They were familiar. She'd seen them in corporate newsletters, in the in-flight magazine's welcome letter. Her mind raced, frantically trying to connect the dots. Mrs. Davenport, however, was not as perceptive. Emboldened by what she perceived as the backing of the crew and security, she decided to insert herself into the conversation. "And who are you?" she demanded haughtily. "Their father. Well, you should have taught your children some manners. They refused to move from seats they had no right to be in. I am a Platinum Medallion member and—" "Ma'am," Robert said, turning his head slowly to face her. The full force of his Arctic gaze fell upon her, and for the first time, Mrs. Davenport felt a genuine pang of fear. Her tirade died in her throat. "I suggest you stop talking, immediately." He then turned his attention back to the security officers. "Release my daughter," he commanded. The officer holding Amara hesitated. He looked from Robert to Cassandra, seeking guidance. "She's the one who called us," he mumbled, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "I am aware of who called you," Robert said, "and you will be having a very long and detailed conversation with your supervisor and mine about your response protocols. But right now, you will take your hands off my child." There was no room for argument in his tone. The officer, sensing a seismic shift in the power dynamic, immediately let go of Amara's arm as if it were red hot. Amara stumbled forward, and Ayana rushed to her side, wrapping a protective arm around her shaking shoulders. The pieces were clicking into place for Cassandra with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The last name on the boarding pass, Sterling, the easy confidence, the command in his voice, the way the air itself seemed to bend to his will. Oh God, no. It was the other flight attendant, a younger man named Mark, who had been quietly stalking the galley, who recognized him first. His face went pale, and he looked as if he'd seen a ghost. He stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. Mr. Sterling," he stammered. "Sir?" The name dropped into the cabin like a bomb. Sterling. The security officers froze, their faces draining of all color. The businessman in 2D, who had tried to intervene earlier, sat bolt upright, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. Mrs. Davenport's jaw fell open, her carefully painted lips forming a perfect silent O of horror. And Cassandra looked as though the floor had just opened up beneath her feet to reveal a fiery pit. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a ghastly, waxy complexion. She stared at the man she had just accused of being a disruptive passenger's father, the man whose daughters she had just ordered to be physically removed from the flight. Robert Sterling, the founder and CEO of Ascendair, her ultimate boss. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod to the young flight attendant, Mark. Then his eyes, burning with a cold, righteous fire, settled back on Cassandra. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet fury in his gaze was more terrifying than any shout. "Cassandra," he said, his voice as soft and sharp as a shard of ice. "Tell me everything that happened here. Start from the beginning, and do not lie to me." The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, punctuated only by Amara's quiet, hitching sobs. Robert Sterling stood like a statue carved from granite, his entire presence a vortex of controlled rage. Everyone's attention was fixed on him, waiting for the verdict he would inevitably deliver. Cassandra's mind was a maelstrom of panic. Her career, 23 years of dedicated service, of smiling through turbulence and calming irate passengers, was flashing before her eyes. She had made a catastrophic, career-ending miscalculation. She had sided with the bully. She had failed the most fundamental test of her job, to treat all passengers with dignity and respect. And she had done it to the daughters of the one man who held her entire future in his hands. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. Her carefully constructed professional demeanor had been stripped away, leaving behind raw, undisguised fear. "I'm waiting," Robert said, his voice dangerously soft. It was Ayana who broke the silence. She had guided her trembling sister back into her seat and was now standing, her small frame radiating a courage that shamed every other adult in the cabin. She looked directly at her father, her eyes clear and steady despite the situation. "She's going to lie, Dad," Ayana said, her voice ringing with conviction. She already did. She told the security officers that our seats were double booked. Robert's gaze snapped back to Cassandra. "Is that true? Did you lie to the security personnel?" Cassandra swallowed hard, her throat clicking. "Sir, Mr. Sterling, it was a very confusing situation. The other passenger was very insistent." "I didn't ask you for excuses," Robert cut her off, his voice like chipping stone. "I asked you a direct question. Did you knowingly provide false information to the officers?" She couldn't meet his eyes. Her gaze dropped to the plush, custom-woven carpet. "Yes," she whispered, the admission barely audible. A muscle in Robert's jaw clenched. "And why did you do that?" I was trying to de-escalate." "De-escalate?" Robert's voice rose slightly, incredulity coloring his tone. "You de-escalated by siding with a belligerent passenger who was harassing my daughters based on their race. You de-escalated by trying to intimidate two 16-year-old girls into giving up their rightful seats. And when they showed more integrity than you have in your entire body, you de-escalated by calling security and having one of them physically assaulted. Is that your understanding of the word, Cassandra?" Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling her pathetic defense. She flinched, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Robert then turned his attention to the two security officers, who were practically trying to melt into the bulkhead. "Your names, now." The first officer, the one who had grabbed Amara, stammered, "Miller, sir. And this is Officer Schmidt." "Officer Miller, Officer Schmidt," Robert said, his tone deceptively conversational. "When you arrived, did you make any attempt to independently assess the situation? Did you ask to see the flight manifest? Did you interview any of the other passengers? Or did you simply take the word of one flight attendant and resort to physical force against a minor?" Miller's face was slick with sweat. "Sir, our protocol is to support the flight crew. They are in command of the aircraft. Your protocol is to ensure safety and security," Robert corrected him sternly. "And what you did here was a gross overreach of your authority and a failure of your duty of care. You escalated a customer service dispute into a physical confrontation. You laid your hands on my daughter." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You can expect a formal review of this incident to begin before this plane even pushes back from the gate. You are dismissed. Get off my aircraft." The two officers, looking utterly defeated, turned and scurried down the jet bridge without another word. Now, only one target remained. Robert's eyes, cold and unforgiving, settled on Mrs. Davenport. She had shrunk back into her seat, her face a pale, blotchy mess. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. She was no longer a platinum medallion member throwing her weight around. She was just a woman who had picked a fight with the wrong family. "Mrs. Davenport," Robert said, walking slowly down the aisle until he was standing right over her. "You are a platinum medallion member, you say. You've been flying with us for 20 years. She nodded mutely, unable to speak. "Ascendair prides itself on loyalty. We reward our most frequent flyers because we value their business," he continued, his voice a low, menacing purr. "But we have a zero-tolerance policy for racism and harassment. What you did today, the vile, prejudiced assumptions you made, the scene you caused, the distress you inflicted upon my children, it is utterly unforgivable." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "Your platinum medallion status is hereby revoked, permanently. You will be placed on our no-fly list, effective immediately. Should you attempt to book a flight with us or any of our partner airlines again, you will be denied. You will gather your belongings and you will deplane. Now, and I suggest you do it quietly." Tears began to stream down Mrs. Davenport's face, carving clean tracks through her expensive foundation. "Please," she whimpered. "It was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," Robert said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "You saw two young black girls in first class, and you decided they didn't belong. You saw their presence as an insult to your own status. You were not misunderstood. You were understood perfectly." He gestured to Mark, the younger flight attendant who had remained silent but observant throughout. "Mark, please escort Mrs. Davenport off the flight, and get the name of the gate agent who approved the security call. I want to speak with them as well." "Yes, sir," Mark said, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and respect. He approached Mrs. Davenport's seat. "Ma'am." Utterly broken, Mrs. Davenport fumbled for her purse and her carry-on. She didn't look at anyone as she was led, humiliated, out of the cabin, the clanking of her gold jewelry now sounding like a funeral dirge. The cabin was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a storm that had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was irrevocably changed. Robert finally allowed his rigid composure to soften. He turned to his daughters, and the terrifying CEO vanished, replaced instantly by a concerned father. He knelt in the aisle between their seats, his eyes filled with a deep, aching pain for what they had just endured. "Amara, baby, are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. He gently took her arm, examining the red welts left by the officer's grip. "Ayanna, are you hurt?" Amara finally let go, collapsing into her father's arms, her body shaking with reaction. "I was so scared, Daddy," she cried into his shoulder. "I know, sweetheart. I know," he murmured, holding her tight. "I am so sorry. So sorry this happened. This should never have happened." He looked at Ayanna over Amara's shoulder, his eyes conveying a promise. "And I will make sure nothing like this ever happens again." The fallout from the incident on Flight 101 was not a quiet internal affair. Robert Sterling was a man who believed that sunlight was the best disinfectant. The cancer of prejudice that had revealed itself on his flagship aircraft needed to be excised not with a scalpel in the dark, but with a laser under the full glare of public scrutiny. Karma in this case would be swift, public, and absolute. Before the plane's doors were even closed for departure, the chain of events was already in motion. Robert remained kneeling with his daughters for a few moments, comforting them, his voice a low, soothing murmur. Once Amara's sobs had subsided into shuddering breaths, he stood up, the CEO persona settling back over him like a cloak. His first call was to the head of airport operations for the entire JFK terminal. His voice was calm, but the words he used were surgically precise and carried an unmistakable threat. He described the actions of Officers Miller and Schmidt not as a mistake, but as a catastrophic failure of judgment and a clear case of assault. He demanded their immediate suspension pending a full investigation, a copy of all security footage, and a personal meeting with the head of their security firm within 24 hours. There was no argument. The executive on the other end of the line, recognizing the potential for a brand-destroying lawsuit and a public relations nightmare, agreed to everything instantly. His second target was the gate agent. Mark, the junior flight attendant, had returned with a name: Sarah. Robert found her still at the podium looking pale and nervous. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked her to recount her decision-making process. "Cassandra called," Sarah stammered, wringing her hands. "She's the lead. She said she had unruly passengers who were refusing to move. She requested security." "And you authorized it?" Robert asked, without asking for details, without questioning why two passengers with confirmed premier-class seats were being labeled unruly. "Did you look at the passenger information, Sarah? Did you see their ages? Did you think it was standard procedure to call armed security for two teenage girls?" I trusted the lead attendant's judgment," she whispered. "Your job isn't just to trust, it's to think," Robert said, his voice cold. "You were the last line of defense against this. You had the power to ask a question, to pause, to seek clarification. You chose not to. You chose the path of least resistance, and that path led to my child being assaulted. Pack your personal items from the office. Human Resources will contact you tomorrow regarding your severance." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she knew better than to protest. She had been a cog in a machine that had produced a horrific result, and the machine's owner was holding her accountable. The final and most direct reckoning was reserved for Cassandra. Robert had her wait in the galley while he ensured his daughters were comfortable, and that the other passengers, who were now watching in a state of stunned awe, were attended to by Mark and the other crew members. He ordered a new lead flight attendant to be brought on board for the flight to London, a trusted veteran he knew personally. When he finally turned to Cassandra, the cabin was nearly ready for departure. He led her to the small galley area, creating a sliver of privacy. 23 years, Cassandra, he began, his voice low. You've been with this airline since before I bought it. You've won awards. You train our new hires. I've read your file. It's exemplary. A tiny, desperate flicker of hope ignited in her eyes. Mr. Sterling, I have never had a complaint. Not one. What happened today was an aberration. I made a terrible mistake in judgment. It wasn't a mistake in judgment, Robert corrected her, his voice firm. It was a mistake in character, a mistake in your fundamental understanding of what this airline stands for. You had a choice between defending two quiet teenagers and placating a loud, prejudiced bigot, and you chose the bigot. You didn't see two of our passengers, you saw two black girls who you, on some level, felt didn't belong in your cabin any more than Mrs. Davenport did. That's not true, she insisted, though her protest was weak, unconvincing even to her own ears. Isn't it? Robert challenged. If those had been two white teenagers, sons of a famous actor or a politician, would you have so quickly caved to Mrs. Davenport's demands? Would you have lied to security? Or would you have defended your passenger's right to be there? You and I both know the answer to that. He let the silence stretch, forcing her to confront the ugly truth of her own bias. You are a liability, Cassandra, he stated plainly. The culture of this airline is my ultimate responsibility, and you have proven yourself to be a poison within it. Your employment with Ascendair is terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the airport. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. The finality of his words was brutal. There was no appeal, no review board. It was over. The hope in Cassandra's eyes died, replaced by a hollow emptiness. The career she had dedicated her life to was gone, evaporated in a single terrible afternoon. As for Mrs. Davenport, her karma was just beginning. Robert made one more call, this time to his head of public relations. He authorized her to release a carefully worded statement. It didn't name the Sterling twins, but it detailed an incident where a valued, high-status passenger was permanently banned from the airline for racially motivated harassment of fellow passengers, including minors. The story, vague as it was picked up by aviation bloggers and then mainstream news outlets. The internet, with its insatiable appetite for stories of entitled Karens getting their comeuppance, did the rest. Within days, other passengers from the flight, including the businessman from 2D, anonymously corroborated the details. Someone leaked Mrs. Davenport's name. Her husband's prestigious law firm was suddenly inundated with calls from reporters. The socialite who had tried to leverage her status found herself at the center of a firestorm of public condemnation. Her gilded world of charity galas and country club lunches came crashing down around her. Back on the plane, as it finally taxied towards the runway, a new sense of peace had settled over the first-class cabin. The new lead flight attendant was warm and attentive. The businessman from 2D leaned across the aisle as Robert was taking his seat behind his daughters. Mr. Sterling, the man said quietly, I just want to say, I'm sorry I didn't do more. I tried to speak up, but... Robert held up a hand. You spoke up. That's more than most, he said, his voice softening. Thank you for that. The only people who needed to do more were the ones in uniform. He looked at his girls. Amara was leaning against Ayanna, her eyes closed, exhausted but safe. Ayanna was looking out the window, watching the lights of New York begin to shrink as the powerful engines of the Boeing 777-9 finally lifted them into the night sky. They were on their way to London, but the journey had already changed them, and their father forever. He hadn't just resolved a conflict, he had started a war against the insidious prejudice within his own company, and he had no intention of losing. The flight to London was smooth and uneventful, a stark contrast to its tumultuous beginning. Yet the emotional turbulence lingered. Robert Sterling did not sleep. He sat in his suite, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating a face etched with grim determination. He wasn't just angry anymore, he was galvanized. What had happened to Amara and Ayana was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a deeper, more pervasive disease. It was a disease of complacency, of implicit bias, of a corporate culture that, for all its glossy marketing about diversity, had failed a critical moral test. By the time they landed at Heathrow, the framework for what would become the Ascend Initiative was already drafted. It was not a small token gesture. It was a root and branch overhaul of the airline's customer service and employee training protocols. The first change was immediate and visible. Within a month, every single Ascend Air employee, from the boardroom to the baggage handlers, was enrolled in a new mandatory and intensive anti-bias and de-escalation training program. It was developed in partnership with a leading civil rights organization and was unflinching in its content. It used the incident on Flight 101 as a core case study, with names redacted but details intact, forcing employees to confront the reality of how easily prejudice could masquerade as professionalism. Cassandra's failure became a lesson for thousands. Secondly, Robert fundamentally changed the power dynamics on his aircraft. A new policy was implemented, empowering junior crew members to report concerns about a lead attendant's conduct without fear of reprisal. A red flag system was created, allowing any crew member to discreetly and immediately alert a ground-based supervisor if they witnessed a potentially discriminatory incident unfolding. The message was clear. Silence in the face of injustice was complicity, and it would no longer be tolerated. Mark, the flight attendant who had correctly identified Mr. Sterling, was promoted and became one of the first trainers for the new system, his quiet integrity now a celebrated example of the new culture. The story of the Sterling twins, as it became known within the company, spread like wildfire. Robert never tried to hide it. Instead, he owned it. He spoke about it at company-wide town halls, his voice resonating with the passion of a father and the authority of a CEO. He used his family's painful experience as a catalyst for change, transforming their humiliation into a powerful tool for education. For Amara and Ayana, the experience was a crucible. The initial trauma gave way to a profound new sense of purpose. They had always been aware of the subtle and overt racism that existed in the world, but having it manifest in such a violent, direct way was a harsh awakening. They saw firsthand how their father wielded his power not just for profit, but for justice, and it inspired them. They started a blog, First Class Citizens, where they wrote about their experiences as young black women navigating spaces where their presence was often questioned. They talked about microaggressions, about the burden of respectability politics, and about the incident on the flight. Their voice, authentic and eloquent, resonated with thousands of young people around the world. They went from being victims to being powerful advocates, using their platform to champion racial equity in the travel and hospitality industries. Their father's company became the first corporate sponsor of their new non-profit foundation. The changes at Ascend Air did not go unnoticed. Initially, there was skepticism, with some industry analysts dismissing it as a PR move, but the changes were real and sustained. Passenger satisfaction scores among minority travelers, which the airline began to track meticulously, climbed steadily. The company's diversity in hiring for customer-facing roles improved dramatically. Ascend Air began to earn a new reputation, not just as a luxury airline, but as an airline that was genuinely committed to creating a safe and welcoming environment for everyone. It became their strongest marketing tool, an authentic brand identity forged in the fire of a genuine crisis. About a year after the incident, Robert was reviewing a quarterly report. It detailed the success of the Ascend initiative, the positive press, the improved metrics, the overwhelmingly positive employee feedback. But the data point that made him smile was a photo attached to an internal newsletter. It was a picture of Amara and Ayana, standing on a stage at a youth leadership conference. They were no longer the scared 16-year-olds from the flight, but confident young women addressing a packed auditorium. In the photo, Amara was speaking passionately into a microphone, while Ayana stood beside her, a look of fierce pride on her face. He realized then that the most important change hadn't happened on his balance sheets or in his corporate policies. It had happened in his daughters. The ugly incident born of prejudice and ignorance had been transformed. Hard karma had indeed hit back, not just punishing the guilty, but also forging strength, purpose, and a lasting positive legacy from the ashes of a painful ordeal. The Sterling family had faced down the worst of human nature and had not just endured, they had ascended. 5 years after the incident on Flight 101, the name Ascend Air was synonymous not just with luxury, but with leadership and corporate responsibility. The Ascend initiative had become the gold standard in the industry, a model studied by business schools and emulated by competitors. The story of what happened that day was no longer a scandalous secret, but a foundational myth of the company's new identity. Robert Sterling, now nearing his mid-50s, had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the airline, choosing to chair the board and focus on the philanthropic work of the Sterling Foundation. The foundation, funded by a significant portion of his wealth, now focused primarily on educational grants and scholarships for underprivileged youth, with a special emphasis on programs that fostered cross-cultural understanding. The true legacy, however, was most vibrant in the lives of his daughters. Amara and Ayana were now 21, poised and articulate young women finishing their final year at university. Amara studying fine arts and sociology, Ayana pursuing a degree in law and public policy. The blog they had started as teenagers, First-Class Citizens, had evolved into a powerful media platform with a podcast, a popular YouTube channel, and a significant social media following. They were sought-after speakers, known for their incisive commentary on social justice issues, delivered with a blend of Amara's creative passion and Ayana's sharp logical reasoning. They never let the world forget the incident, but they reframed it. It wasn't their story of victimhood. It was a case study in systemic failure and the potential for radical, positive change. They interviewed pilots, flight attendants, and travel executives, pushing the entire industry toward greater transparency and accountability. The karma that had so decisively struck Mrs. Davenport and Cassandra had rippled outwards in unexpected ways. The law firm where Mrs. Davenport's husband was a partner, after an initial period of damage control, underwent a significant internal review of its own diversity and inclusion policies, shamed into action by the public scandal. Cassandra, after a year of unemployment and deep reflection, found a new path. She began volunteering at a community mediation center, using her decades of experience in customer service to help resolve conflicts in a way that was constructive, not destructive. In a letter she sent to Robert Sterling, one he read with mixed emotions, she took full responsibility for her actions and thanked him, strangely, for firing her, as it had forced her to confront a prejudice she never knew she had. One crisp autumn evening, Robert sat in the audience at a prestigious awards gala in New York. The First-Class Citizens Foundation was receiving an award for its advocacy work. He watched as his daughters walked onto the stage to a standing ovation. They looked regal, confident, and inseparable. Amara spoke first, her artist soul shining through. "An empty canvas can be intimidating," she began, her voice captivating the room. "But it is also an opportunity. 5 years ago, our lives felt like a canvas that someone had violently slashed. But with the help of our family and our community, we learned that you can paint over the slash. You can turn the scar into part of a new, more beautiful, more complex picture." Ayana followed, her legal mind providing the structure to Amara's art. The picture Amara speaks of is one where dignity is not a privilege of status or a function of race, she said, her voice clear and strong. It is a fundamental human right. Corporations are not just engines of profit. They are powerful social actors. They have a responsibility to protect that right for their employees and their customers. My father's airline learned that lesson. Our goal is to ensure it is a lesson the entire world takes to heart. As they finished their speech, the applause was thunderous. Robert Sterling felt a swell of pride so profound it brought tears to his eyes. This was the true reckoning. It wasn't just in the firing of an employee or the banning of a passenger. It was here, in the transformation of his daughters from victims of a hateful act into powerful agents of change. They had taken the ugliest of circumstances and forged from it a legacy of strength, advocacy, and hope. They hadn't just endured the storm, they had learned to command the winds. The Sterling family had truly and irrevocably ascended. Justice served at 30,000 feet. This wasn't just a story about a bad flight. It was about the power of accountability and the courage to stand against prejudice, no matter how powerful the person seems. The entitled passenger and the complicit crew learned a hard lesson. Your status is no shield against the consequences of your own bigotry, especially when you target the wrong family. The Sterling sisters turned a traumatic, humiliating event into a movement for change, proving that a voice for justice is the most powerful first-class ticket of all. If you were moved by this story of karma and consequence, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to share it with someone who loves a story where the bully gets what they deserve. And for more incredible, dramatic storytelling that will keep you on the edge of your seat, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. What if your worst moment of public humiliation turned into your greatest moment of power? One woman, a brilliant black CEO, is heading to the most important meeting of her life. She has a first-class ticket on Apex Air, but the gate agent sees her skin color, not her status, and flatly denies her the seat she paid for. The agent, a smug passenger, and even security close in, ready to make her a criminal for demanding what is rightfully hers. But they have no idea who they're dealing with. They are about to learn that the woman they tried to break is the one who owns their entire world, and the karma that's coming is as swift and turbulent as a Category 5 hurricane. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar chaos of scents and sounds. Stale coffee, anxious sweat, the ceaseless symphony of rolling suitcases and echoing announcements. For Dr. Anya Sharma, it was simply the necessary noise that separated one part of her life from the next. Today, it separated New York from London, and the finalization of a monumental acquisition from the board meeting that would anoint her its new queen. Anya was not just a success, she was a phenomenon. At 34, she held a PhD in economics from Cambridge and had built a private equity firm from the ground up, a firm that specialized in identifying and acquiring undervalued legacy corporations, injecting them with innovation, and turning them into titans of industry. Her latest conquest was the Helios Stratton Group, a sprawling conglomerate whose crown jewel was Apex Air, one of the world's largest airlines. The deal had been signed and sealed a week ago. The flight to London was for her official introduction as the new chairperson of the board. Dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit that spoke of quiet power and wearing glasses that framed her intelligent, focused eyes, Anya approached the priority boarding gate for Apex Air Flight 117. Her ticket, nestled in her passport, was for Seat 2A, first class. It was a necessity, not a luxury. The transatlantic flight was her last window to review the dense dossiers on the board members she was about to meet. The gate agent, a woman in her late 50s with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Carol, eyed her with a look of profound skepticism. The line was meant for first class, business, and platinum tier frequent flyers. Anya, to Carol's jaded eyes, fit none of those categories. She saw a young black woman, and her mind, a Rolodex of prejudices, flipped to the wrong card. "Can I help you?" Carol's voice was clipped, each word a tiny, sharp icicle. "Hello," Anya smiled, holding out her passport and boarding pass. "I'm here for Flight 117. Carol took the documents without making eye contact, her fingers brushing against Anya's as if recoiling from a contaminant. She scanned the boarding pass. A flicker of something, annoyance, disbelief, crossed her face before being replaced by a mask of bureaucratic indifference. "I'm afraid there seems to be a problem with your seat," Carol said, her voice dripping with false concern. Anya's smile didn't falter. "Oh? I received the confirmation this morning. Seat 2A. "Yes, well, the system is showing a conflict. It appears the seat has been double booked. We're going to have to move you." Carol was already tapping at her keyboard, the clatter of the keys a soundtrack to Anya's demotion. "We have a seat in premium economy, 24B middle seat, but there's extra legroom." Anya's mind, a machine built for complex negotiations and hostile takeovers, processed the situation instantly. This wasn't a system error. It was a power play. She had seen it before, in boardrooms and on golf courses, the subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways people tried to put her in her place. "I'm sure it's just a glitch," Anya said, her tone still pleasant but now laced with a thread of steel. "Perhaps you could reboot the system, or check with a supervisor. I paid for a first-class ticket, and I have a great deal of work to prepare for my meetings in London. I need the space and the quiet that the cabin provides." A man standing behind Anya, dressed in an obnoxiously pink polo shirt and smelling of expensive, cloying cologne, huffed impatiently. "For God's sake, just take the other seat. Some of us have planes to catch." His name was Mark, and he held his own first-class ticket like a scepter. Carol gave Mark a commiserating smile before turning back to Anya, her expression hardening. "Sir, I am trying to resolve this, ma'am," she said, her use of the word now an insult. "There are no other first-class seats available. The cabin is full. This is the only option." She slid a new boarding pass for seat 24B across the counter, a flimsy piece of paper that represented a profound disrespect. "The cabin is full, or the seat you believe is mine has been given to someone else?" Anya asked, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. She did not take the new pass. "Listen, I don't know what you're trying to imply," Carol snapped, her professional veneer cracking to reveal the ugly prejudice beneath. "These things happen. Now, are you going to board, or are you going to hold up the entire flight?" "I am going to sit in the seat I purchased," Anya stated, her voice unwavering. "Seat 2A. The final boarding call for Flight 117 echoed through the terminal. The gate, once bustling, was now nearly empty, leaving Anya, Carol, and the smug Mark in a tense triangle. The jet bridge was a tunnel to a world she was being deliberately locked out of. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at her composure. She had faced down billionaire sharks and navigated corporate espionage, yet here she was at the door of her own company, being treated like a trespasser. This was not just an inconvenience, it was a declaration. And Anya Sharma never ever backed down from a declaration of war. Anya took a deep, centering breath. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Outrage was a weapon to be sharpened, not wielded recklessly. She looked at Carol, then at Mark, and saw the smug satisfaction in their eyes. They expected her to make a scene, to yell, to cry, to conform to the stereotype they had already assigned her. She would do none of those things. She stepped back from the counter, pulling out her sleek, state-of-the-art smartphone. Her fingers moved with practiced speed. First, she took a clear, time-stamped photo of Carol, her name tag, and the boarding pass for 24B still sitting on the counter. Then, she began a video recording, discreetly pointing the camera to capture the entire gate area. "I'd like your full name, please," Anya said, her voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "And the name of your direct supervisor." Carol's face flushed a blotchy red. "I don't have to give you that information. I've given you your boarding pass. Now get on the plane or I'll have you removed for causing a disturbance." "I'm not causing a disturbance," Anya replied, her voice remaining level, a stark contrast to Carol's rising hysteria. "I am a ticketed first-class passenger being denied boarding for my assigned seat without cause. You are the one creating this issue." She sent a text message under the screen. It was to her chief legal counsel. The message was simple. Incident at JFK, Gate C62, Apex Flight 117. Record everything. Stand by. Mark, the polo-shirted passenger, chimed in again. "Oh, give it a rest. You're probably one of those people who buys an economy ticket and tries to scam your way into first. I've seen your type before." Anya turned her gaze to him, a cold fire in her eyes. "My type? Please enlighten me." But Carol, feeling emboldened by her lone ally, had already made her move. She picked up the phone at her station. "Yes, I need security at Gate C62. I have a passenger who is refusing to board, becoming aggressive." Anya almost laughed. Aggressive? She hadn't even raised her voice. But she knew the script. She knew how easily a black woman's calm assertion could be twisted into a narrative of aggression. Within minutes, 2 Port Authority police officers arrived, their expressions grim and weary. They were used to these kinds of disputes. "What's the problem here?" the older officer asked, his eyes scanning the scene. Carol launched into a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Thank God you're here. This woman," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Anya, "was given a seat reassignment due to a booking error, and she's refusing to accept it. She's holding up the entire flight, becoming belligerent, threatening me." Anya stood silent, letting Carol spin her web of lies. When the agent finally wound down, the officer turned to Anya. "Ma'am, what's your side of the story?" In the same calm, measured tone, Anya explained. "Officer, my name is Dr. Anya Sharma. Here is my passport and my original confirmed ticket for seat 2A in first class. I have a critical business meeting in London that requires preparation on this flight. This agent, Carol, claims the seat is double booked, but has refused to show me any proof or call a supervisor. She simply relegated me to a middle seat in the back of the plane. When I calmly questioned this, she accused me of being aggressive and called you." She held up her phone. "For the record, I have been recording this interaction since she refused to identify her supervisor." The officers exchanged a look. This was not the hysterical, unruly passenger Carol had described. Anya's composure and clarity were unassailable. Meanwhile, on board Flight 117, the passengers in the plush first-class cabin were growing restless. The flight attendants were offering more champagne and warm nuts, but the delay was grating. In seat 1A, a man with silvering hair and a jawline that spoke of years of clenching through corporate battles looked at his Patek Philippe watch for the 3rd time. This was Julian Croft, the chief executive officer of Apex Air. He had a golf game with a duke he couldn't miss and a board meeting he was dreading. The last thing he needed was a delay on his own flagship route. "What in God's name is the holdup?" he grumbled to the lead flight attendant. "There appears to be a ticketing issue at the gate, Mr. Croft," she said apologetically. "They're trying to resolve it now." Julian sighed, the sound a mixture of frustration and arrogance. A ticketing issue. On his airline. Unacceptable. He prided himself on running a tight ship. Delays were a sign of sloppiness, a weakness he could not tolerate. After another 5 minutes of inaction, his patience, a notoriously finite resource, evaporated. "Right, that's it," he muttered, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'll sort it out myself." He stood up, smoothed down his bespoke suit jacket, and strode with purpose toward the front of the plane. He was Julian Croft, the CEO. Problems melted in his presence. He was about to step into the jet bridge, fully expecting to fix a minor clerical error. He had no idea he was walking toward the complete and utter demolition of his world. As Julian Croft stepped out of the jet bridge and into the gate area, the scene that greeted him was not the simple ticketing squabble he had imagined. It was a tableau of high-stakes human drama. He saw Carol, his gate agent, looking flustered but self-righteous. He saw 2 Port Authority officers, their faces set in neutral masks of authority. He saw a man in a garish pink polo shirt, looking smug. And at the center of it all, he saw a black woman, poised and impossibly calm, who radiated an aura of such intense, unshakable dignity that it seemed to bend the very air around her. His first instinct, honed by years of corporate crisis management, was to side with his employee. He strode forward, projecting an air of ultimate authority. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that immediately captured everyone's attention. "Carol, why is my aircraft not moving?" Carol's face lit up with relief. The CEO himself was here to vindicate her. "Mr. Croft, thank goodness. This passenger is refusing to accept a seat reassignment. I've tried everything, but she's being completely unreasonable. She's held up the entire plane." Julian's gaze fell upon Anya. He didn't recognize her. In his mind, she was just another difficult customer, another problem to be swiftly and efficiently crushed. "Ma'am," he began, his tone condescending and final, "I am the CEO of this airline. My agent has informed me of the situation. We have offered you an alternative seat. I suggest you take it, or we will have you removed from the airport and you will be compensated for the unused portion of your ticket. We are done here." He turned to leave, a dismissive flick of his hand signaling the end of the conversation. But the woman did not move. She did not shrink. Instead, a slow, knowing smile touched her lips, a smile that sent an inexplicable jolt of unease through him. Anya watched him, this man who had run her new company into the ground with his lazy, hands-off leadership. This man whose entire multi-million-dollar compensation package she had personally approved for termination pending the outcome of this very meeting in London. The sheer delicious irony of the moment was almost overwhelming. She let the silence hang in the air for a beat, heavy and thick with unspoken power. Carol was smirking. Mark was chuckling under his breath. The cops were preparing to move. Then Anya spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a diamond blade. "Julian," she said. The use of his first name was a thunderclap. It was familiar, intimate, and utterly insubordinate for a mere passenger. It stopped him dead in his tracks. He turned back slowly, a frown creasing his brow. "I beg your pardon?" "I was wondering when you might show up," Anya continued, her smile widening just a fraction. "Though I admit I didn't expect you to be quite so hands-on with customer service disputes. Then again, given the systemic issues, perhaps it's for the best." Julian stared at her. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition that he couldn't place. Her face. He'd seen it before. Where? He scrambled through the files in his mind. Board reports? Industry magazines? No, it was more recent than that. It was from the thick, intimidating dossier his assistant had left on his desk yesterday evening. The one marked Urgent and Confidential. Helios Stratton Acquisition Leadership Profile. His blood ran cold. The dossier had contained a single photograph and a biography of the new, mysterious head of the private equity firm that had just bought them out. The new chairperson of the board. The person he was flying to London to meet for the very first time. The person who now held his entire career in the palm of her hand. Dr. Anya Sharma. The name hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked from her calm, knowing face to Carol's ignorant smirk, to Mark's smug entitlement. The full, catastrophic weight of the situation crashed down upon him. He wasn't talking to a disgruntled passenger. He was talking to his new boss, and he had just threatened to have her thrown out of the airport. The transformation was not instantaneous. It was slower, more terrible, like watching a glacier calve into the sea. For a long second, Julian Croft's mind simply refused to process the information. His brain, a fortress built on decades of assumed authority, had just been breached. He stared at Anya, his face a mask of confusion. The name, Dr. Anya Sharma, echoed in the silent, screaming cavern of his mind. But it was just a sound. It hadn't yet connected with the terrifying reality standing before him. Anya watched him, her expression a cool, clinical mask. She saw the cognitive dissonance warring behind his eyes. He was a man drowning in plain sight, and she was not inclined to throw him a rope. This moment was too clarifying. His reaction, the immediate dismissal, The siding with his prejudiced employee, the condescending tone, was a perfect, uncut specimen of the corporate sickness she had been hired to cure. "Julian," she said again, her voice a soft, silken thread of steel. "Does the name not ring a bell? Helios Stratton Group, your new parent company?" That was the key. The corporate jargon, the name of the deal. His brain, finally bypassing the social assumptions that had failed him so spectacularly, made the connection. The dossier, the photograph on the leadership profile. This exact woman, her gaze direct and intelligent even on paper. The woman he was flying to meet. The woman who now owned him. The blood didn't just drain from his face, it fled, leaving a sickly, grayish-yellow vacuum in its wake. A cold sweat erupted across his brow and the back of his neck. His bespoke suit, a moment ago a suit of armor, suddenly felt like a cheap costume. The Patek Philippe on his wrist felt like a manacle, counting down the last seconds of his professional life. He began to stammer, a pathetic, guttural sound that was a garbled mix of doctor and Sharma. "Doctor, Sharma, I am so—" His voice cracked, the words failing to form. It was inadequate, a child's word for a cataclysmic failure. Carol and Mark stared, their shared bubble of smug superiority popping with a silent, baffling hiss. They couldn't hear the specifics, but they could see the CEO of Apex Air, a man they viewed as a corporate god, visibly crumbling. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Carol's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a deep, furrowed confusion. Why was Mr. Croft groveling? "You had no idea?" Anya asked, stepping forward. Her voice was quiet, for his ears only now, but it held the deadly precision of a sniper's bullet. This wasn't a question. It was a judgment. "No idea of what, Julian? Let's be specific. That a black woman could afford a first-class ticket? Or that a black woman could be the one who decides if you're still employed tomorrow?" He flinched as if she had physically slapped him. The truth of her words was a white-hot poker to his soul. It was both. He hadn't seen a passenger. He had seen a problem, a stereotype, and his failure to see her, truly see her, had just cost him everything. All the terror, all the profound, soul-crushing humiliation he felt needed an outlet. He couldn't direct it at Anya, his new sovereign. So he turned, his entire body trembling with a mixture of fear and rage, and focused on the person who had led him to this slaughterhouse. "Carol." "You," he snarled, his voice a low, venomous hiss that was more frightening than any shout. "What did you do?" "Her ticket. Give me her ticket now." Carol, jolted by his tone, fumbled for Anya's original boarding pass. Julian snatched it from her hand, his fingers leaving dents in the cardstock. His eyes darted to the name, Dr. Anya Sharma, then to the seat, 2A. He threw it down on the counter next to the flimsy, insulting pass for 24B. The evidence of his failure was laid bare. "You are fired," he said, the words falling like stones into a grave. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Apex Air is terminated." He saw the tears welling in her eyes, the utter shock on her face, and felt nothing but a desperate need to distance himself from her, to cauterize the wound she had opened. "Pack your personal effects from your locker. Security will escort you from the premises. Your credentials will be revoked by the time you reach the employee exit. You will not speak to another Apex employee. You will not say another word to me. You are done." Carol's world, so neatly ordered by rules and prejudices, collapsed. "But, Mr. Croft, the system showed a double booking. I was only following procedure," she whimpered. "The only thing you were following," Julian spat, his face inches from hers, "was your own vile bigotry. You didn't see a customer, you saw a target, and you just aimed this airline's single biggest rifle at your own CEO. Now get out of my sight before I have you charged with willfully damaging corporate interests." He straightened up, took a shaky breath, and turned to Anya, his posture now a study in complete and utter subservience. "Dr. Sharma, please, forgive me, forgive this unacceptable failure, allow me." He bent down and personally took her carry-on bag, a gesture of self-abasement so shocking that the two Port Authority officers exchanged a look of disbelief. This was no longer a civilian dispute. This was a corporate execution. Then he turned his wrath on the final player. Mark, the polo-shirted cheerleader for Carol's prejudice, had been frozen, his smug look having melted into a waxy mask of fear. "And you, sir," Julian said, his voice dripping with glacial contempt. "Your commentary was noted. Your behavior was reprehensible. As the CEO of this airline, I am personally informing you that you will be deplaning immediately. Your ticket will be refunded in full, and you can consider yourself placed on the involuntary no-fly list for Apex Air and all our partner airlines. For life." He leaned in closer. "You are a sales executive, I presume. Let's see how you conduct your business when one of the world's largest airline alliances refuses to carry you. Our legal team will be in touch if you feel the need to dispute it." Mark's face went white. A lifetime ban wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a professional death sentence. He opened his mouth, a squeak emerging, but one look at Julian's murderous expression and Anya's cool, unreadable gaze, and he deflated, physically shrinking into his obnoxious shirt. Without another word, Julian Croft, CEO, turned into a bellhop. Holding Anya's bag, he personally escorted her down the jet bridge, his back ramrod straight, his face a mask of anxious deference. The flight attendants, who had seen him stomp out in a huff, now watched in stunned silence as he returned, leading the very woman from the gate dispute like she was royalty, which, in the world of Apex Air, she now was. Whispers and stares followed them down the aisle. He led her to seat 2A. A balding man who had been gleefully enjoying his unexpected upgrade was swiftly and unceremoniously evicted by Julian himself. "Sir, there has been a mistake. Your assigned seat is 18C now." The man scurried away without a word. Julian carefully placed Anya's bag in the overhead compartment. He turned to her, his voice a near whisper, trembling with desperation. "Dr. Sharma, can I get you anything? Pre-departure champagne, water? The flight codes for the Wi-Fi? Anything at all?" Anya looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since the revelation. She didn't see a CEO. She saw a terrified man, stripped bare. "I'm fine, Julian," she said, her voice even. She opened her briefcase, her demeanor shifting back to pure business. "Just ensure we arrive in London on time. We have a board meeting to attend." She paused, letting her final words hang in the air with chilling weight. "And it seems the agenda has just been significantly revised. We have a great deal more to discuss than I had originally anticipated." Julian Croft nodded numbly, sweat beading on his forehead. He backed away slowly, bowing his head almost imperceptibly, a courtier retreating from the throne. He knew with absolute, bone-deep certainty that his troubles had only just begun. The 7-hour flight to London would be the longest, most agonizing journey of his life. The 7-hour flight to London was a masterclass in psychological torture. Julian Croft did not return to the comfort of seat 1A. He couldn't. It felt like sitting on a throne of hot coals next to his executioner. Instead, he relegated himself to the galley, a cramped, undignified space where he became a phantom presence, a ghost of authority haunting his own flagship. He spent the flight in a state of hyper-vigilant panic, personally inspecting every drink poured for Anya, every meal plated. The flight attendants, accustomed to his usual gruff detachment, were baffled and unnerved by this new, terrifyingly servile version of their CEO. They gave him a wide berth, whispering amongst themselves, understanding only that the woman in 2A held an inexplicable absolute power over him. Anya, for her part, was an island of tranquility in his storm. She accepted a single glass of water and worked. She opened her laptop and the dense dossiers she'd intended to study, but her mind was no longer on the existing profiles. The incident at the gate had provided her with a far more valuable piece of intelligence than any report could offer. It was a live, raw sample of the company's diseased culture. She wasn't just reviewing personnel files anymore. She was drafting a new corporate philosophy, architecting a revolution at 35,000 feet. Every clink of cutlery from the galley, every nervous glance from a passing flight attendant, Every minute Julian spent in his self-imposed exile became data points in her new strategy. When the plane landed at Heathrow, a black Mercedes S-Class was waiting on the tarmac, an obsequious offering from a terrified Julian. He had personally called ahead, pulling strings to ensure she wouldn't have to touch the public terminal. He rushed to her side as she deplaned, already reaching for her bag. "Dr. Sharma, your car is here. I've taken the liberty of arranging a police escort to clear traffic. I can ride with you, brief you on the way," he offered, his voice laced with a desperate hope for a reprieve. Anya paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at him. "No, Julian," she said, her tone not unkind but immutably firm. "That won't be necessary. I think it is crucial that you experience the full arrival process of a standard passenger. See the company from the ground up. I need to prepare for the meeting." She took her own bag from his hands and descended the stairs, leaving him standing on the jet bridge, utterly dismissed. The ride into central London was quiet, allowing her to put the final sharp edges on the speech she was about to give. The Apex Air boardroom, on the 48th floor of a skyscraper in Canary Wharf, was designed to intimidate. A single, colossal slab of polished black marble served as the table, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than a small car. The panoramic windows offered a god's-eye view of London. It was a room built for titans. Today, it would be a courtroom. The board members, a collection of mostly pale, male, and stale executives in their late 60s, were already gathered. They were the old guard, men who had known Julian for years. They murmured about the flight delay, speculating about the mysterious new chairperson. They expected a dragon, but a dragon of their own species, a ruthless financier, a corporate raider. Julian entered first. His appearance shocked them into silence. His face was ashen, his suit looked rumpled despite its quality, and he moved with the haunted shuffle of a man walking to his own gallows. He took his seat without a word, fumbling with his papers, his hands trembling visibly. And then Dr. Anya Sharma walked in. The room, already quiet, became unnervingly still. She was not the grizzled corporate warrior they had imagined. Her youth, her gender, her race, it all threw their expectations into disarray. She moved with a silent, fluid grace, her tailored pantsuit a slash of navy blue against the room's monochrome palette. She didn't stride. She flowed to the head of the table, her presence filling a vacuum they hadn't known existed. She placed her tablet on the marble surface and looked up, her gaze sweeping across each face at the table. It was not a hostile look, but it was deeply analytical, a silent, powerful assessment that left each man feeling individually weighed and measured. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice crisp and clear, filling the room without effort. "I am Dr. Anya Sharma. I am looking forward to working with all of you to steer Apex Air into a new era of profitability, innovation, and prestige." She then spent 20 minutes laying out her initial financial and operational strategy. It was breathtaking. She spoke of leveraging predictive analytics for dynamic fuel hedging, of overhauling their outdated booking software to create a seamless digital experience, of strategic acquisitions of smaller regional carriers to feed their international hubs. She spoke their language, EBITDA, ROI, market share, with a fluency and vision that left them spellbound. The old guard relaxed. This was a dragon they understood. She was one of them, a maker of money. Then, having earned their professional respect, she pivoted. The warmth left her voice, replaced by the chill of polished steel. "But none of this," she said, letting the words hang in the silent room. "Not the profit, not the innovation, not the stock price, matters in the slightest if the very foundation of this company is rotten. And I am here to tell you today that the brand you believe you are selling is a lie." She paused, looking directly at Julian, whose head was bowed as if in prayer. "Our brand is not our logo or the new lie-flat seats in business class. It is the sum total of every single human interaction we have with our customers. This morning, I was provided with an impromptu and deeply insightful case study on the state of that brand." She proceeded to recount the incident at JFK. She did so with the detached, methodical precision of a prosecutor laying out a case. She didn't use emotive language. She didn't raise her voice. She simply presented the facts. Fact: a ticketed first-class passenger holding a valid ticket for seat 2A was denied her seat. Fact: the gate agent, without verification, declared a system error and unilaterally downgraded the passenger to a middle seat in premium economy. Fact: when the passenger calmly requested to see a supervisor, the agent refused and called security, falsely accusing the passenger of aggression. Fact: another first-class passenger felt entitled to heckle and insult this customer with the agent's tacit approval. She let the facts sink in. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. And fact, she continued, her voice dropping, when the CEO of the airline arrived, his first and only instinct without any investigation was to side with his employee, threaten the paying customer, and order her removal. A collective intake of breath swept around the table. Every eye darted toward Julian, who looked as if he wanted the marble table to swallow him whole. This was not a random event, Anya declared, her gaze sweeping over them all once more. This was a symptom of a deep, systemic cultural disease, a disease of bias, of arrogance, of profound disconnection from the very people who pay our salaries. It is a cancer of complacency, and it starts at the top. The room was funereally silent. Anya stood, placing her hands flat on the cool marble. Therefore, my first official act as chairperson is not to approve a new budget. It is to order a complete corporate exorcism. We will commission a top-to-bottom, fully independent audit of this entire company's culture. Every department, every policy, every hiring practice, every executive. We will root out the rot of prejudice and indifference, from the gate to the galley to this very boardroom. Her eyes lingered on a few of the older, more visibly stunned members. And effective immediately, we will launch a new mandatory training initiative for every single employee. Not a one-hour webinar. An ongoing, rigorous curriculum designed by the world's leading experts in the field. It will be called the Dignity for All program. And yes, Julian, she said, finally addressing him directly again. Your attendance is mandatory. You will be in the front row of the very first session. Julian Croft felt a cold dread unlike any he had ever known. He was not just being reprimanded, he was being publicly remade, his authority stripped, his judgment flayed open for all to see. He was no longer the king of Apex Air. He was a courtier, a subject, desperately trying to survive the new queen's reign. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that this was his only path to survival. He had to become her most zealous convert, or he would be the first heretic she burned at the stake. The 6 months that followed were a whirlwind of change for Apex Air. The audit Anya had commissioned was as brutal and thorough as promised. It uncovered pockets of systemic bias, outdated training protocols, and a general culture of complacency that had festered for years under Julian Croft's detached leadership. 2 vice presidents were forced into early retirement. Dozens of managers were either retrained or replaced. The Dignity for All program, designed by a team of top diversity and inclusion consultants under Anya's direct supervision, was rolled out across the entire company. It was not a one-off seminar with stale donuts and box checking. It was an immersive, ongoing curriculum that used real-life scenarios, including an anonymized but unmistakable version of Anya's own experience, to teach empathy, de-escalation, and cultural competence. Anya met with Julian once a week in the London boardroom. These were not pleasant chats. They were grueling interrogations where he had to account for every single aspect of the company's transformation. He was a changed man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a wary, humbled focus. He worked tirelessly, driven by the cold, hard knowledge that he was serving entirely at her pleasure. He knew she could have fired him on day one, and the fact that she hadn't was not an act of mercy, but a challenge. She was forcing him to clean up his own mess, to take responsibility for the culture he had allowed to decay. One brisk autumn afternoon, Anya sat in his office overlooking the runways of Heathrow. The quarterly numbers are promising, Julian, she said, closing a report. The customer satisfaction scores are up 18%. Employee morale, particularly among frontline staff, is the highest it's been in a decade. "It's your vision, Anya," he said, and for the first time, she heard genuine respect in his voice, not fear. "You gave us the blueprint, I'm just the contractor." "You're the CEO, Julian," she corrected him gently. "You've done the work. You're holding your people accountable, and yourself. That's why you still have this job." It was the closest she had ever come to offering him praise, and it landed with the weight of a royal decree. He had passed his trial by fire. The story of the incident at JFK became a legend at Apex Air. It was never made public, but every employee, from the newest hire to the most senior pilot, knew the tale of the gatekeeper and the queen. It served as a powerful, ever-present reminder of the company's new values, a cautionary tale about the consequences of underestimating people. Later that week, Anya was flying back to New York. As she settled into her seat, 2A of course, the lead flight attendant, a young woman with kind eyes, approached her. "Dr. Sharma," she said with a warm, genuine smile, "it is an honor to have you with us today. Can I bring you a glass of champagne before we take off?" Anya looked around the cabin. She saw a diverse crew, attentive and professional. She saw passengers of all backgrounds being treated with the same level of courtesy. She thought back to that day, the sting of humiliation, the cold fury. It had been an ugly, painful moment. But from the ashes of that ugliness, she had forged a better, stronger, more decent company. She had turned a personal insult into a catalyst for institutional change. "Thank you," Anya said, her own smile genuine and relaxed. "I'd love one." As the plane ascended, banking over the city of London, she looked out the window at the world shrinking below. She had not just bought an airline, she had given it a new soul. And as she flew toward the horizon, she knew with absolute certainty that the change was real, and the sky was finally as open as it was always meant to be. 1 year later. The air in JFK's Terminal 4 still smelled of coffee and anxiety, but at Gate C62, the atmosphere was different. A young Apex Air gate agent named Maria was dealing with a frantic elderly Japanese couple, who, through a tour booking error, had tickets for a flight that had departed an hour ago. They spoke no English. An older, pre-reform version of the airline might have seen them as a problem to be shunted aside. But Maria, a graduate of the inaugural Dignity for All class, saw only 2 scared people in need of help. She patiently used a translation app on her company-issued tablet, her voice calm and reassuring. She saw the husband clutching his chest, his breathing shallow. Ignoring the growing line, her training kicked in. She immediately called for a wheelchair and medical assistance while simultaneously working with a supervisor to book the couple onto the next available flight to Tokyo, at no extra charge, and securing them meal vouchers. She treated them not as a logistical problem, but as human beings. Watching from a nearby coffee shop, Julian Croft felt a strange sense of pride. He was conducting one of his now regular incognito walkthroughs of his own airports, a practice Anya had insisted upon. He saw the situation resolve with kindness and efficiency. He saw the relief on the old couple's faces. He saw Maria, the agent, receive a grateful nod from her supervisor. This was the airline Anya was building, and that he was now, finally, helping to lead. His relationship with Anya had evolved from one of pure terror to a complex, grudging respect, which had slowly, painstakingly, blossomed into genuine admiration. The weekly meetings were still grueling, but they were no longer inquisitions. They were strategy sessions. He had come to realize that Anya hadn't kept him on as an act of prolonged punishment, but as a test, for both of them, for him to prove he could change, and for her to prove she could reform an institution from within, rather than simply burning it down. In a moment of vulnerability 3 months prior, he had confessed to her, "I thought you were punishing me. Now I realize you were teaching me." Anya had simply nodded. Leadership is a constant education, Julian, for both of us. That education had been costly for others. Karma, Anya knew, was not just a lightning strike. It was a long, slow echo, For Carol, the Echo was a life of quiet desperation. After being blacklisted from every airline, she had found work as a cashier at a sprawling, soulless big-box store in suburban New Jersey. The job was a purgatory of beeps, plastic bags, and the endless shuffling procession of customers. Her uniform was an ill-fitting polyester vest. Her authority was gone. She was now the one who had to smile, to ask, "Did you find everything okay?" to people who barely looked at her. One rainy Tuesday, a young black woman came through her line, struggling with a crying baby and a mountain of diapers. The woman's card was declined. A wave of panic washed over the young mother's face. Before Carol could even recite the store policy, the man behind the woman in line, a construction worker in dusty boots, stepped forward. "Here," he said, tapping his own card on the reader. "I got it." The young mother burst into tears of gratitude. Carol watched the simple, profound act of grace, and for the first time, she felt the full, crushing weight of what she had done. It wasn't about losing her job. It was about the poverty of her own spirit, the kindness she had been incapable of showing. She finished the transaction, her hands trembling, haunted by the ghost of the woman she could have been. For Mark, the Echo was digital and inescapable. The blogger's video, though it didn't show Anya, had captured his sneering face and the audio of his "I've seen your type before" comment with perfect clarity. It became a meme, a textbook example of corporate arrogance. His name was attached to it on Reddit threads and Twitter callouts. He was doxxed. Fired from his medical device sales job, he found himself unemployable in any client-facing role. The lifetime airline ban was merely the seal on his professional tomb. He now did freelance data entry from his small apartment, the swagger gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man permanently braced for the next online insult. He had spent his life judging others on their appearance, and now his own appearance, frozen in a few seconds of viral hatred, had become his life sentence. Anya's legacy, meanwhile, was being written not in share prices, but in stories like Maria's at Gate C62. It was in the rising customer satisfaction scores, the plummeting number of official complaints, the flood of positive social media posts. Apex Air, once a symbol of indifferent corporate power, was becoming known for its humanity. This culminated in an awards dinner in Geneva. Anya, on behalf of Apex Air, was accepting the Ethical Leadership and Corporate Responsibility Award, a prestigious prize rarely given to an airline. Standing at the podium under the warm lights, she looked out at the assembled titans of industry. "Thank you," she began. "This award isn't for me. It's for the 80,000 employees of Apex Air who learned that our altitude is determined by our attitude." She spoke of financial turnarounds and operational efficiencies, but then her tone grew more personal. "A little over a year ago," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "a passenger was wronged by our company. She was judged, dismissed, and disrespected. The failure wasn't a glitch in the system. The failure was the system. It was a system that allowed bias to go unchecked and valued protocol over people." In the front row, Julian Croft listened, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He knew she was talking about him, about Carol, about that fateful day. But there was no malice in her voice, only reflection. "That incident," Anya continued, "could have been a lawsuit. It could have been a PR disaster. Instead, we chose to make it a lesson. We chose to make it our foundation. We learned that true strength isn't about having the power to punish. It's about having the courage to rebuild. We learned that dignity isn't a luxury item for the front of the plane. It's the fuel that lifts the entire aircraft. Our greatest acquisition was not another company. It was a renewed sense of our own humanity." She raised the crystal award. "This belongs to every gate agent who chooses empathy, every flight attendant who offers comfort, and every leader who has the humility to admit they were wrong and the determination to make it right. Thank you." The applause was thunderous. As Anya walked off the stage, she caught Julian's eye. He simply nodded, a look of profound, earned respect on his face. The echo of that ugly moment at JFK had not faded, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a sound of humiliation, but a resonance of change, a testament to the fact that sometimes to reach a new altitude, you first have to be reminded of how far you can fall. That single moment of prejudice at the gate could have ended in defeat. But for Dr. Anya Sharma, it was just the beginning. She didn't just get her seat back, she took the whole company back from the brink of moral bankruptcy. This story proves that the most powerful response to injustice isn't just to fight for yourself, but to rewrite the rules for everyone who comes after you. Carol and Mark faced their personal karma, but the real victory was the systemic change that ensured no one else would have to endure what Anya did. If this story of ultimate karma and incredible empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us share it with the world. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of justice being served. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder that your true power can be found in the moments when others try to take it away.